Representatives. We talked with Patrick J. Michaels of the Cato Institute a few days ago about that very topic. Well, I want to dive into more of some of the economic issues that are going on here and the different topics to really watch in this year of 2019. And so I'm pleased to welcome Business for Breakfast, Daniel Turner, I believe for the second time. He's founder and executive director of Power the Future and has worked in public affairs and communications for quite a long time. Power the Future, an organization that is all about really the innovative technologies of the day and moving forward with a way to keep those energy prices affordable, not astronomical. Daniel Turner joins us here on Business for Breakfast. Daniel, good morning. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning to you, Jimmy, and thanks for having me on again.
It's good to have you on the program. So I want to start with this question for you. I asked this of Senator Cory Gardner, who said he fully supports the nomination of the acting EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler to be the EPA Administrator. This was just announced, I think, yesterday. Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and actually, as I was prepping for your show, I was looking through social media and seeing the number of green groups coming out in vehement opposition, saying that he is a true threat to the environment and to public safety, even more so than Scott Pruitt. So it seems that no matter who you nominate, he is the most dangerous man to head up the organization. Look, I think if you are on the ideological left or in the green movement, you have a certain desire for the EPA to act in a much more authoritative way, like we saw during the Obama administration. That's not going to happen under this administration. So everyone who President Trump nominates, they will oppose. But that's the problem with having the majority in the Senate, right? They can't really stop that person's nomination. What they can do is make their lives miserable, and I'm sure they will start doing that as soon as he's sworn in.
Now, when I spoke with acting Administrator Wheeler a couple of months ago here on this program, we dived in, into the fact that the Trump administration has been, I think, diligently and appropriately working towards scaling back. The government knows best over regulation of the energy space, oil and gas and so forth, particularly because it is the innovations within the oil and gas industry, particularly fracking and ongoing developments of new fracking technology that have in recent years kept carbon dioxide emissions lower and even reduced them. In 2017, the United States led the world in that regard, but it was reported just a couple of days ago in the Wall Street Journal and many other places that carbon dioxide emissions, these greenhouse gases, that these contribute to climate change. Of course, the folks that are very much supportive of this, such things as the Climate Crisis Committee, say that they are the driving cause far and away, and we need to scale back everything that we do to address it. But carbon dioxide emissions rose 3.4% in 2018. When I talked with Acting Administrator Wheeler about all this, it was that the innovation that was unleashed by the private sector was leading the charge in reducing carbon dioxide emissions. You're going to see folks on the left say, look, the Trump administration policies have failed, and last year's increases in carbon emissions are attributed to pulling out of the Paris Accord and the deregulation agenda, all those kinds of things. What do you say to that, Daniel Turner?
Yeah, the Paris Accord is always the scapegoat for everything. Look, there is no doubt that emissions rose in 2018 after 3 years of steady decline. And if you are an emissions hawk, that is disconcerting. But look at other things that rose. Simultaneously, we had record manufacturing jobs in the United States, more so than ever since 1995, right? That increases the number of emissions. We had record numbers of Americans traveling, both domestically and internationally. That contributes to emissions. And so if you want to look at this as a holistic view and say, okay, emissions are rising, therefore it's the Trump administration, or is it the result of people living in the first world and enjoying all that comes with it, which is a better quality of life, travel, jobs? And so if you are on the environmental left, you have to tell me, what of those should we cut? Do we limit how much people can travel? Do we close manufacturing again and send those jobs back to China or to Mexico? Right? Which one do you want to get rid of? Because you can't have it both ways. We have a record number of coal plants closing, which I think is devastating because I'm a big advocate for coal and the coal industry. So it's not coal that's doing it. We had a record number of natural gas come online. So again, if you are on the environmental left, you have to tell me who needs to lose their job or who needs to be told that your family can't go to Paris for New Year's, right? Because somewhere you have to draw the line.
Well, I think they want to draw the line at you being able to drive around in the vehicle of your choice. That seems to be where they're headed with this. But in terms of the carbon dioxide emissions increase last year, but relative to the past decreases, I'm noticing here that the United States has become a net exporter of oil and natural gas over the last several years. It kind of was firmed up last year, as I recall, but it was the trend that we've been seeing. And so the big thing that comes to my mind is that if it really is the case that the oil and gas industry is spewing out all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and exacerbating these problems, then why have we seen, as it's grown consistently in recent years, why have we seen, in terms of production, why have we seen carbon dioxide emissions going down? Well, it is clearly because they have been innovating with new technologies that have kept things at bay, when really, according to the theories, you should be seeing astronomical increases in the output, right?
Exactly. And you think of the amazing innovation and entrepreneurship of the American people. We have record amount of oil coming online. We are now leading the world in oil production, and we are a net exporter of oil. And at the same time, Venezuela is down. If you look at oil as a global commodities market, which of course you do and your listeners do, Venezuela is down about 600,000 barrels a day because of their socialist experiment. OPEC is cutting, but yet oil prices are still pretty darn low. And that is all because America is increasing its output. It's almost as if America is saying, we don't care what the rest of the world does in terms of their oil. We have enough to sustain our quality of life and keep prices low. This is something that you would think people want to celebrate. Do you want to talk about emissions? Well, if that's where your focus is, of course, then that's where you're going to get hung up. But again, where do people have to change or curtail their livelihood? And if the environmentalists will not make that decision, then they really can't have a seat at the big boy table. You look at your new governor who was recently sworn in. The ballot initiative, Prop 112, that would have decimated the oil and gas industry, was categorically rejected at the ballot box. And yet there is super environmental pressure on him to enact it basically through fiat, through governor executive order. Why would Governor Polis do that to the people of Colorado? Look at the benefit it does. Look at the amount of jobs it creates, 280,000 jobs. Is he going to listen to the radical environmentalists, or is he going to stand with the men and women of Colorado who need these jobs and who are contributing to the overall economy? So again, it's a complicated issue, the climate change one, and I think the environmental left gets the pleasure of looking at it just from the sort of noble, it's all about the earth and that's all we care about. Well, I care about people, and you have to take those two hand in hand.
Daniel Turner is our guest from Power the Future. Let's talk about some of the different issues that are going to be coming up in this year of 2019 as it really starts to get rolling. You've got the politics of the climate change issue. For example, we see the Climate Crisis Committee in Congress. You've got Elizabeth Warren now backing the Green New Deal in tandem with her run for president, which, of course, has been vigorously supported by the new Congresswoman from New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. How does this politics all play out when you've got two sides that are very divergent on this issue? And it does seem to be that there's one side that's becoming increasingly stern on the idea that we need to have massive changes to the U.S. economy or we're all going to die.
Yeah, the Green New Deal is really going to be the issue of 2019 for everyone joining the Democrat primary for the 2020 campaign. Like you mentioned, some candidates have already come out and endorsed it. Oddly enough, no one really knows what it is or what it does. It is intentionally vague, and it sounds like a panacea. But as more information comes out about it and what it costs, it's not just about green technology. It's things like guaranteed jobs for everyone, guaranteed living wage, guaranteed health care, guarantee. So it really becomes a big socialist propaganda under this Green New Deal banner. But every candidate is going to be forced to stand up one way or the other against it. Oddly, yesterday, Tom Steyer, probably the number one funder of all environmental issues, he spent $120 million last election cycle. He dropped out of the presidential race, and I was very surprised because he's been leading on these issues. I'm wondering if he's a little disappointed that people like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez have stolen his thunder, and the shiny new object clinging on to these crazy green ideas is now garnering all the media attention, and he doesn't see himself a place for himself. But that is going to be the issue of the Democrat primary members: environmental issues, Green New Deal, and it will be a big civil war between them.
Well, I think Steyer recognizes that there is going to be a crowded field, and he may be able to influence people more in that direction behind the scenes. Unlikely to get the nomination. Also, he's hell-bent on impeaching President Trump, and that's what he's going to be investing his money in more than anything, all the indications are. Okay, so we were talking about regulations. There could be a lot of regulatory lawsuits challenging the United States government from the private sector, and then you'll see a lot of regulations maybe from the states or deregulation efforts being challenged by some of the states. I could see Colorado's new Attorney General, Phil Weiser, engaging in some of those activities, and others just going after the Trump administration for not being strong enough on these issues in court.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you can see why some of these environmental groups and similar ideological organizations, why they spend so much money opposing Brett Kavanaugh, and they realize that as a justice, he is not a fan of the regulatory state, and he is not a fan of large presidential executive orders and actions. All that President Trump's administration is doing is undoing the regulations that the Obama administration put in. And every time they do, they face a lawsuit. And if you are Greenpeace or the Sierra Club, you realize that Justice Kavanaugh is going to side against you and say, yeah, if one president created a regulation, another president can remove the regulation, because that's why the left likes regulation and not legislation. And so the regulatory state is going to be an ongoing battle, and it has been for the EPA and other agencies. But you're going to see Administrator Wheeler or whoever takes that role continue to just roll back the thousands of regulations the Obama EPA put in, ideologically driven regulations. And every time he rolls one back, you're going to see a wave of lawsuits from these environmental groups. And that's just going to be an ongoing battle for 2 more years.
Let's talk about the economics, Daniel Turner, of the climate issue and of energy in general. You see the growth of carbon taxes. Of course, we've got the whole oil situation. Now OPEC reducing their production output because they want to bring down prices a bit. The United States now leading the world in oil and natural gas production. What are your thoughts on all of that in tandem with electric vehicles, the Paris Climate Accord's potential impact on energy production and output, and plastic straws?
Yeah, that's quite a menu you gave me.
Yeah, I think so.
It was a wonderful story, and that we linked to on powerthefuture.com that listed how many billions of dollars were lost in productivity because of environmental lawsuits. Right, every time the environmentalists shut down a pipeline production, that costs the people building the pipeline money. And then when you calculate what it would do in savings of the gas or the oil being transported, et cetera, and it was in the $90 billion range of 2018 alone of lost revenue and lost productivity. So these environmental groups are always a detriment to the economy. They don't really do anything productive. They don't really create anything. They don't really advance the ball. They just constantly stop and stop. And America is ready for progress, and after 8 years of stagnation, ready for economic growth. The plastic straw thing is crazy to me. I live in Washington, D.C. We just banned plastic straws in sort of solidarity with the garbage in the Pacific Ocean, which 95% of it comes from China, India, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So somehow the D.C. City Council thinks our straws go from the Potomac, I guess, down the Atlantic, through the Panama Canal, over to the Pacific Ocean, and join that huge garbage collection. I mean,
That's
it's
right.
just nonsense.
That's how it works.
This is what this incrementalism of the environmental left does. And so just little quality of life things. And people could say, oh, so you can't use a straw, big deal. But at what point do we get to say, government has to stop taking away all of my little personal joys and rights, right? How big my car can be, what type of vessel I can drink my coffee out of. These are ongoing little encroachments in the name of this climate change nonsense. And then, oddly enough, in their personal life, they never seem to live it. 2018, at the end of the year, was one of the biggest climate meetings of all time. It was in Poland, and 30,000 people flew to Poland for about a 10-day meeting about climate change. And multiple agencies did the climate footprint of that, and they said it's roughly the size of an 8,000-person town for an entire year. So your listeners, some of them may live in communities of 8,000 people. That was the same carbon footprint of a bunch of elite UN and climate snobs flying to Poland for 10 days to sit at the Ritz-Carlton and drink wine and eat pierogies and tell the rest of us, well, we should probably take away their straws. Right? So when they start living in their personal life, what they want government to mandate in our life, I will give the environmentalists a lot more credit. Bernie Sanders spent $300,000 in November on private jet travel. And he used private jets because he was campaigning for climate candidates. So if Bernie Sanders can spend $300,000 on private jets in 1 month, how can he really tell me how to live my life?
That does kind of remind me of the man I call the Reverend Al Gore, head potentate, grand prophet of the Church of Climate Change of Latter-day Liberals. It does certainly remind me of him a little bit, with his home output, let alone his own private jet activities. But Daniel Turner, again, our guest from Power the Future. When we look at all of these encroachments you were just discussing, is there a point at which the American people really start to align with the likes of should be the next EPA administrator for sure, Andrew Wheeler, and say, okay, yeah, scale back some of these regulations because you've gone too far? Is there a point where the American people will recognize the overreach and say, no, you got to step it back a little bit?
I'm sure they will. Americans are pretty resilient people, and they will take it on the chin, but only for so long. Here's a great example, not in America, but in another country, France, right? Your listeners saw the Yellow Vest protests that are still going on, by the way. The Yellow Vest protests that were started because their president, Emmanuel Macron, in the name of climate change, imposed a tax that would raise the price of gas to over $7 a gallon. And the French people, not the Parisians who probably take buses and ride unicycles wearing berets, but the French people who live in the countryside and who need their vehicles, or who are delivery men, or who, et cetera, they were the ones who protested and said, wait a second, I can't afford $7 a gallon, but and the 50% tax that was added on was going to fight climate change. The people of France said, why are you ruining our lives? Again, because China and India are increasing their pollution and their emissions by 5-6% a year. And so those protests were literally violent. People did die. There was a lot of destruction. There was a lot of anger. I don't mean this in a threatening way at all, but America was founded when enough citizens were tired of their government encroaching on their lives and putting on ridiculous taxes. It is part of our DNA. And so if after the Trump administration we get a Bernie Sanders-like president who's putting all of these taxes and burdens and taking away rights and taking away privileges in the name of climate change, American people are not going to sit by. They will rise up. They will protest. I don't think the protests will become violent, but I wouldn't put it past them at the same time. We do not like a government that meddles nonstop in our life. And that's what the Green New Deal and so many other laws are starting to do to the American people, and they won't stay silent.
Well, that's why I'm hopeful the United States Senate will approve Andrew Wheeler for that post of EPA administrator, as I said, I've interviewed him, and I think he's doing phenomenal work, and I think he really understands these issues. So we got to call that a conversation, though. Daniel Turner, Power of the Future, thanks for joining us this morning on Business for Breakfast.
Jimmy, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
You as well. All right, we're going to take a break here on the program.